The news spread like wildfire across the globe. Scientists, diplomats, military officials, and ordinary people alike could scarcely believe what they were hearing. A message from space, from a species far more advanced than humanity, had reached Earth. And not just any message, a message of peace, an invitation to unite, to share knowledge, and to explore the stars together. The Xalrith, an alien species whose technology surpassed anything on Earth by millennia, had sent a signal offering diplomatic contact. The world's leaders, carefully chosen to represent every nation, met in a high-security bunker beneath the United Nations headquarters, gathered around a large round table, their faces a mixture of disbelief and cautious optimism. The implications of this moment were profound. First contact was always a dream for many, but never something expected in their lifetime. But now, here it was. Earth was not alone. Humanity was no longer just a small speck on a lonely planet in a vast, unfeeling universe. The doors to a galactic community were being opened, and all of humanity stood on the precipice of something enormous. Dr. Evelyn Matthews, the lead scientist of the Earth Diplomacy Council, was one of the first to speak. Her voice was steady, despite the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "We need to prepare," she said, her gaze fixed on the shimmering hologram of the Xalrith ship projected in front of them. "This isn't just a scientific breakthrough. It's a diplomatic one. We must ensure that we send the right message." Her fingers hovered over the holographic interface, displaying the incoming transmission, an offer to meet in Earth's atmosphere, at a designated landing site within the next week. "Do we trust them?" asked General Robert Drake, the commander of Earth's unified military forces, his tone wary. "What if this is a trick? What if they come with other motives?" The general's skepticism mirrored the thoughts of many in the room. After all, the universe was vast, and while peace was desirable, history had taught humanity that things were rarely so simple. "We don't know," replied Dr. Matthews, "but we can't live in fear. This is an opportunity, a chance to make the first move as a united species. We must approach this with caution, but we cannot afford to let fear guide us." The decision was made. Earth would send a diplomatic delegation, one composed of the most experienced diplomats, scientists, and military advisors, to meet the Xalrith. They would travel to the designated site, ready to establish peaceful communication and gain more insight into the intentions of these extraterrestrial visitors. But as plans were set into motion, there was a growing sense of unease among the people. Everyone was asking the same questions. What if the Xalrith didn't want peace? What if this was just the first step in something much darker? Still, the overwhelming desire to believe that humanity's future lay in the stars was too great to ignore. And so, with the final preparations underway, the world held its breath. The first human-constructed spaceport in history was completed to host the diplomatic delegation, and the military moved into high alert. This was an unprecedented moment in history, but humanity was determined to make it one to remember. As the appointed day arrived, the sky seemed to darken, filled with anticipation. Humanity, unified and eager, looked toward the heavens, ready to meet the stars. But little did they know, they were about to learn a critical truth. First contact may have been their dream, but the reality was about to challenge everything they knew about their place in the universe. The day of the arrival dawned with a mixture of awe and nervous anticipation. Across the globe, people gathered in front of their televisions, their eyes glued to the screen, waiting for the moment that would change humanity forever. The Xalrith ship, an awe-inspiring vessel, was expected to land within the next few hours. Its design was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Sleek, almost organic in appearance, shimmering with an otherworldly sheen that seemed to ripple as it moved through the sky. In New York City, where the official first contact ceremony would take place, barricades were set up along the streets, keeping the crowds back while VIPs and government officials took their positions. Helicopters buzzed overhead, cameras trained on the approaching alien ship, which hovered silently just above the clouds. The air was thick with the hum of excitement, the promise of the future settling over humanity like a blanket. Inside the United Nations building, Dr. Matthews and the rest of the diplomatic delegation stood in the control room, watching the live feeds. The mood was a mix of excitement and tension. All eyes were on the alien ship as it descended toward Earth. The ship's movements were impossibly graceful, its size vast and imposing, dwarfing even the largest human-made aircraft. It was clear that the Xalrith were a species of great power, but for now, they seemed peaceful. "This is it," General Drake muttered, eyes fixed on the monitor. "No going back now." As the ship touched down, a perfect, quiet landing, the world held its collective breath. The ground shuddered beneath them, and the spacecraft's hatch slowly opened with a smooth, silent motion. The Xalrith delegation emerged, tall, elegant beings, their skin a deep, iridescent blue, with sharp features and bright eyes that seemed to shimmer with intelligence. They wore long flowing robes that gave them an ethereal, almost regal appearance. Their leader, a tall figure with silver markings on his face, stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the gathered crowd, taking in the diplomats, the cameras, the millions of onlookers. Dr. Matthews took a deep breath and walked forward to meet the Xalrith leader. "On behalf of Earth, I welcome you," she said, her voice steady but filled with awe. "We are honored by your visit." The Xalrith leader, his features calm, nodded slowly. "We have waited long for this moment. It is an honor to meet the species that shares our desire for peace and progress." Humanity's representatives extended their hands in greeting, and for a moment, it felt as if the future of Earth was unfolding before their eyes. The world's cameras snapped pictures, broadcasting the peaceful moment across the globe. It was everything humanity had dreamed of. Yet, as the ceremony began, there was something subtly off. The Xalrith, while courteous, seemed distant, too distant. Their eyes flicked around the crowd, never settling on any one person for too long. Their gestures, though graceful, were precise, calculated, and their smiles, perfectly measured, like something rehearsed, didn't reach their eyes. Dr. Matthews couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. She noticed how the Xalrith leader's gaze lingered on the crowd, his eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second. It was a fleeting moment, barely perceptible, but enough to stir an unease in her. The air, which had been so full of anticipation moments before, now felt strangely thick, almost oppressive. She glanced at General Drake, who was standing a little farther back, his eyes narrowing, as if he, too, had sensed something was amiss. For a moment, the Xalrith leader's voice broke the silence. "We offer you technology, knowledge, and unity. We believe that together, we can achieve greatness." The words were perfect, the tone calm and soothing, but it was then that Dr. Matthews noticed something even more unsettling, a subtle shift in the Xalrith's posture. Their stance was no longer open and welcoming. They were rigid, almost like soldiers on alert. The shift was so slight that it might have been dismissed as imagination. But in that moment, the feeling of peace began to fray at the edges. Dr. Matthews knew one thing for certain. Something was wrong, and it was only a matter of time before the truth would come to light. The ceremony proceeded, though the unease lingered in the air like a silent storm cloud. The Xalrith leader, whom humans now knew as Eldrin, continued to speak with eloquence, but something in his voice felt rehearsed, distant. Humanity's representatives, though outwardly polite, exchanged wary glances. The words were comforting, yet the body language spoke a different story. The offer of technological advancement, resources, and cooperation was tempting, but the unsettling shift in demeanor could not be ignored. As Dr. Matthews stepped away from the gathering to review the transmission data from Earth's military, her mind raced. The peaceful overture from the Xalrith seemed too perfect, too flawless. The world was on edge, despite the polite words. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was not as simple as it seemed. Were they truly offering cooperation, or was something darker lurking beneath their composed exterior? Meanwhile, at the United Earth Military Command, General Drake watched the unfolding events through secure satellite feeds. He'd already sent a small fleet of monitoring vessels into space to keep an eye on the Saurith ship's movements. What the world didn't know was that Earth's military had been preparing for a worst-case scenario for years, working on classified projects in the event of a potential interstellar threat. But the last thing anyone expected was for that threat to come from a peaceful envoy. As Drake reviewed the status reports, his expression hardened. The Leviathan, humanity's most advanced warship, was in orbit just beyond the Saurith fleet's reach, awaiting its next orders. The ship was an engineering marvel, equipped with cutting-edge stealth technology and devastating firepower. It was Earth's answer to the unknown, a response to the possibility of an extraterrestrial adversary. The ship's AI, codenamed Ether, had been programmed with one purpose: to defend Earth, no matter the cost. While the humans on the ground conducted their diplomatic discussions, the Leviathan orbited silently above, out of view of the Saurith delegation. But this was a tactical error, one that would soon prove to have far-reaching consequences. A junior officer aboard the Leviathan, Lieutenant Marco Reyes, sat at his post, monitoring the ship's systems. His eyes narrowed as a series of encrypted signals began to flicker on his console. It was a routine scan from Earth's military satellites, but the transmission was unusually strong, almost as though it had been aimed directly at the Leviathan. Curious, Reyes attempted to filter out the noise, but what he uncovered sent a chill through him. The signal wasn't just data. It was a beacon, broadcasting a distinct electromagnetic signature that matched the exact wavelength used by the Saurith. The implications were immediate. Had they already begun scanning Earth's military assets? Did they have the capability to detect Earth's warships? Reyes hesitated. If the Saurith had already noticed the presence of the Leviathan, then it was only a matter of time before they made the connection that humanity possessed more advanced technology than they had anticipated. He reported the anomaly to Captain Emma Darnell, who was overseeing the ship's operations. "We've got a problem, Captain," Reyes said, his voice tight. "I'm detecting anomalous readings from a signal near Earth's atmosphere. It's too close to the Saurith ship's frequency range." Captain Darnell's face hardened as she processed the data. "Get a full report and send it to General Drake. We don't want to show our hand unless we have to." Darnell turned to the communications officer. "Alert command. Tell them to increase surveillance. If the Saurith catch wind of us, things are going to escalate quickly." Back on Earth, Dr. Matthews and General Drake were finishing up their last few discussions with the Saurith delegation when the first sign of trouble occurred. The ground shook with an unexpected tremor. At first, it was small, a subtle vibration in the concrete. But then, seconds later, the unmistakable sound of air sirens wailed across the city. Drake's hand instinctively moved to the communicator at his belt, his eyes snapping to Matthews. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. The answer came too quickly. An emergency alert flashed across their screens. An unidentified craft was approaching Earth's atmosphere at high speed. It wasn't a civilian vehicle or another diplomatic shuttle. It was armed, an unmistakable military-grade vessel heading toward Earth. Dr. Matthews' stomach dropped. The Saurith had somehow detected Earth's hidden warship. The peaceful first contact, which had begun so promisingly, was about to fracture. The Saurith had been right to be wary. But the humans, they were not the weak, innocent species the aliens had hoped to find. And now the Saurith would learn exactly what humanity was capable of. The emergency alert flashed across every communication device in the region, sending a wave of panic through the crowd. Military personnel on the ground scrambled, eyes darting toward the sky. In the distance, just beyond the towering skyline, the shadow of an unknown craft began to take shape. The Saurith had no knowledge of the Leviathan, but it was clear they suspected something was amiss. The peaceful nature of the initial meeting was crumbling as quickly as the tremors beneath the feet of the onlookers. Dr. Matthews and General Drake exchanged a worried glance. The Saurith's earlier composed demeanor had faltered when the alarm blared, and it was now evident that their perception of humanity was changing. From cautious curiosity, their attitude had shifted to something more guarded, more suspicious. The appearance of an unconfirmed military vessel in Earth's orbit could not be ignored. The Tsaurith leader, Eldrin, stepped forward as the crowd whispered in mounting confusion. His expression remained unreadable, but his posture betrayed a slight shift. His muscles tensed, his eyes scanning the skies. He turned to Matthews with deliberate slowness, his words like a quiet command. "Explain this, Earth. What is that craft?" The question hung in the air, thick with accusation. Matthews swallowed hard, fighting to maintain her composure in the face of the growing tension. She began, but her voice faltered for a moment. She had not anticipated this confrontation so early. What had begun as a hopeful step toward unity was spiraling into something much darker. "We've been preparing for defense," she continued, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Humanity has developed the means to protect itself, and that ship is part of that initiative. It's called the Leviathan." Eldrin's eyes narrowed, his lips twitching as if he were about to speak, but he stopped himself. His expression grew even colder, though his face remained impassive. Behind him, the Tsaurith delegation seemed to exchange glances, some murmuring softly in their language, their voices tinged with suspicion. "You mean to say," Eldrin's voice was low, barely above a whisper, yet it echoed with authority, "that you have constructed a warship without our knowledge?" The tone was not one of accusation, but of a deepening concern, a warning. "This is not the species we anticipated." General Drake moved closer to Matthews, his military instincts kicking in. "It's not like that," he interjected, his voice firm. "We were not planning to keep this a secret, but we had no way of knowing who would come to Earth and what their intentions would be. It's a precaution, nothing more." Eldrin's gaze flicked briefly to the horizon, then back to the humans. "Your words may be well-intentioned, but your actions have betrayed you." There was a cold finality to his tone that sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. The Tsaurith turned and gestured to his companions, signaling a shift in their demeanor. The warmth that had initially filled the air during their peaceful speech was gone, replaced by a chilling formality. The Tsaurith delegation took several measured steps back, their earlier openness replaced by an unmistakable wariness. Humanity's dream of joining the galactic community seemed to be slipping away in real time. The Tsaurith, who had arrived offering peace, now viewed Earth's preparedness as a threat. What was meant to be an invitation for cooperation had been misinterpreted as an act of aggression. The delicate balance of trust was breaking apart before their eyes. But Dr. Matthews wasn't ready to give up. Despite the growing tension, she knew this was still salvageable. "Eldrin, please," she said, her voice now tinged with desperation. "We're not looking for conflict. If we've made a mistake, it was out of fear, not malice. We just want to understand each other. Give us a chance to explain." For a moment, it seemed as if Eldrin might relent. His eyes softened, just slightly, as if considering her words. But then, a communication signal broke through the tension. One of the military commanders had just sent an urgent message. "Eldrin," Dr. Matthews said, turning slightly to the side, "I must apologize for this disruption. We've received some new intelligence. There are disturbances in our satellite systems. Our military believes there may be hostile forces entering Earth's proximity." The Tsaurith leader's eyes flickered in suspicion, his expression darkening once again. "You expect us to believe this, Earth, after what we've seen?" Before Matthews could respond, an alarm blared from a nearby station, confirming what everyone feared. Unidentified ships, more than a dozen, had emerged from hyperspace, heading straight for Earth. They weren't human, and they weren't Tsaurith. The cold silence that followed the announcement was shattered by the unmistakable hum of tension in the air. The Tsaurith, still recovering from their misinterpretation of Earth's intentions, now realized that this moment of fragility had turned into something else entirely. They were no longer just dealing with an uncertain species. They were facing a planet caught between potential peace and an unknown, looming threat. As the new crisis unfolded, Earth's fate hung in the balance. The Xalrith, who had come to offer peace, were now questioning whether they could afford to trust a species so deeply entangled in its own fears. And humanity, on the brink of war, was forced to reckon with the dangerous consequences of its own preparedness. The atmosphere was electric with fear and confusion as the announcement of the approaching hostile fleet broadcasted across the globe. Humanity's eyes turned to the skies, unsure whether they were witnessing the beginning of their end or the dawn of an even greater unknown. As the Xalrith processed the information, their demeanor hardened further, distrust now clearly evident on their alien faces. The offer of peaceful cooperation was crumbling, replaced by uncertainty and fear. Dr. Matthews stood at the forefront, her heart pounding in her chest. The information was still coming in, but the situation was already spiraling beyond her control. The fleet, still unidentified, was on an intercept course. The military reports came in, confirming that these ships did not match the Xalrith's signature or any known human craft. This was something entirely new, and their aggressive trajectory left no room for negotiation. "We cannot ignore this." General Drake's voice was grim as he stood beside Matthews, his hand gripping the console. "This isn't just about Earth's security anymore. If those ships mean us harm, everyone's at risk, including the Xalrith." Eldrin, standing rigidly, finally spoke, his voice cold and laced with suspicion. "You bring unknown dangers to our doorstep, Earth. You claim peace, yet we see nothing but fear in your actions. First, you hide your weapons from us, and now." He paused, his gaze flicking to the ominous fleet approaching from the edge of space. "You bring war to our very doorstep." Matthew's mind raced. The Xalrith had no way of knowing the new threat wasn't of humanity's making. The mysterious ships had arrived too quickly for any prior engagement. These were not Earth's enemies. Who were they? And why did they appear now, just as Earth's first contact with the Xalrith was in the process of turning disastrous? "Listen to me," Matthews said, turning to Eldrin, trying to keep her voice steady despite the panic creeping into her thoughts. "We are not the ones behind this. We don't know who they are. But I can assure you, Earth did not bring this upon you. We need to work together. Our technology is our only hope of fending off whatever this is." Eldrin's gaze didn't soften, but there was a momentary flicker of doubt in his eyes. Perhaps, just perhaps, humanity had not been the true threat all along. But it was clear that the Xalrith still saw Earth as a potential liability, one whose actions and secrecy might now jeopardize the fragile peace that had yet to even begin. "We will give you one chance to prove your sincerity, Earth." Eldrin's voice carried across the growing tension. "But if this proves to be a trap, if we discover you have been hiding your true intentions, our pact is finished." The threat was clear. There would be no second chance for Earth to prove itself. As Matthews nodded solemnly, the hum of military transmissions suddenly filled the air. The enemy ships were now within range. Over a dozen massive vessels, far more advanced than anything humanity had yet encountered, but their movements were erratic and aggressive. They did not respond to any attempts at communication. This was not a misunderstanding or an exploratory fleet. This was an invasion. "General Drake," Matthews said, her voice urgent, "we need to initiate the Leviathan's defense protocols. Now." Drake turned to the communications officer, barking orders for Earth's military to stand by. Despite the sudden, harrowing sense of crisis, the warship the Leviathan remained hidden, its cloaking systems still intact. But now, with the growing presence of the mysterious enemy ships, there was no choice but to reveal humanity's most powerful asset. On Earth's surface, fear was palpable. News outlets were broadcasting the approaching fleet's ominous silhouette, their power and numbers undeniable. Meanwhile, as humanity prepared for the worst, their focus remained on the alien visitors. Would the Xalrith aid them in this conflict, or had the last few hours of misunderstanding, suspicion, and hidden truths sealed their fate as enemies. Back in orbit, the Leviathan's sleek form slowly deactivated its stealth cloak, revealing its intimidating presence to both the alien ships and the Xalrith fleet. The warship, a symbol of humanity's strength, moved into position above Earth's atmosphere. The crew was ready, but there was no time for hesitation. The Leviathan was the only thing standing between Earth and whatever force had just entered their space. General Drake, his face taut with stress, issued the final command. Prepare to engage. The warship's guns powered up, its massive engines glowing with power. Humanity's greatest creation, ready for battle, hovered over Earth, waiting for the first move. But as the countdown began, an unexpected transmission crackled through. The Xalrith fleet, hidden just outside of Earth's orbit, cloaked, had also powered up. The once offered hand of peace had receded entirely, and now the alien ships were preparing to engage as well. Humanity had hoped for peace, but in this instant, it seemed clear that Earth was caught between two overwhelming forces, neither of whom appeared willing to back down. As the unknown enemy drew closer and the Xalrith moved into position, Matthews looked out at the shimmering sky, her heart heavy with dread. What would it take to save Earth now? The silence in the command center was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the communication systems. The world was on the brink. On one side, humanity's greatest weapon, the Leviathan, sat poised to defend Earth from the unknown alien threat. On the other, the Xalrith fleet, once allies, now hovered with tense readiness, their warships positioned as if waiting for the right moment to strike. Dr. Matthews stood at the center of the room, her eyes glued to the live feed, watching the approaching enemy fleet grow larger on the screen. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her, knowing that one wrong move could result in unimaginable consequences. Her thoughts briefly returned to the Xalrith and their cold, accusing words. The fragile bond of peace had been shattered, and now they were all on the verge of war. But despite the distrust and uncertainty, Matthews knew that Earth couldn't face this enemy alone. General Drake, Matthews said, her voice calm yet tight with anxiety. I'm giving the order to engage. We need to show them we're not just a target. We're a force to be reckoned with. Drake nodded, his face pale, but his eyes steely with resolve. Aye, Doctor. Initiating the Leviathan's weapon systems now. The command room trembled as the Leviathan powered up, its colossal engines whirring into life. The warship's weapons array, hidden beneath its sleek surface, began to hum, preparing for the coming battle. General Drake turned to the communications officer, his voice firm. Alert the Leviathan's crew to stand by for combat. We need to be ready. As the order went out, the crew aboard the Leviathan shifted into battle mode, their faces grim as they prepared for the fight of their lives. Captain Emma Darnell stood at the bridge, her hands steady on the controls, watching the approaching fleet through the ship's massive viewing windows. She knew they were outnumbered, but the Leviathan was humanity's greatest achievement. It had been built with one purpose, to defend Earth from any threat, regardless of the cost. Suddenly, a transmission cut through the static. A crackling voice came through on the encrypted channel. This is Captain Yusola of the Jorith Confederation. The voice was cold and mechanical, laced with an alien accent. You are standing in the way of our conquest, humans. Surrender immediately or face annihilation. The message was clear. Earth was under attack, and there would be no negotiation. The alien ships, now confirmed to be Jorith vessels, had advanced into Earth's orbit, their weapons primed for destruction. Their fleet was massive, more than 20 ships, each larger and more advanced than anything Earth had ever seen. Dr. Matthews clenched her fists. She had hoped for an explanation, a reason behind their actions, but there was no time for diplomacy now. The unknown threat was real, and it was clear that the Jorith were intent on wiping humanity off the map. We need to respond, Matthews said, her voice urgent. Now. General Drake turned to his tactical officer. Fire a warning shot. Let them know we're not backing down. The Leviathan's enormous cannons rumbled to life. A beam of pure energy shot from the ship's hull, streaking across the atmosphere toward the Joreth fleet. The blast was precise, a message fired in the hopes that it would be enough to deter the enemy from advancing. For a moment, the sky went silent. Then, in an instant, the Joreth fleet responded. The space around Earth erupted in brilliant flashes of light as their ships opened fire. The blasts were devastating, tearing through the upper atmosphere, sending shockwaves across the planet's surface. The initial salvo was enough to knock out several satellites, but the human defenses were holding strong. The Leviathan returned fire, its weapons sending beams of energy that tore into the enemy ships, making them stagger back in surprise. The Xalrith fleet, caught between the two warring forces, seemed unsure of their next move. Eldrin, their leader, stood with his hands folded, watching the chaos unfold. His eyes were cold, calculating. The Xalrith had no loyalty to the Joreth, but they also could not afford to appear weak. "You promised peace," Matthews said, turning to Eldrin, her voice sharp. "This is your chance to prove it." Eldrin hesitated, his gaze flickering between the Earth forces and the Joreth warships. There was a long moment of tense silence, and then, with a swift gesture, he gave the order. "We will fight with you." The Xalrith fleet powered up, their weapon systems glowing with power as they launched their own attack. Their ships, though smaller, were faster and more agile than the Joreth's massive warships. The sudden addition of the Xalrith fleet to the battle tipped the scales in humanity's favor. Now, Earth was no longer alone. The skies above Earth became a war zone, filled with the deafening roar of lasers, explosions, and the flashing trails of incoming missiles. For every shot fired from the Leviathan, another Joreth vessel was knocked from the sky. For every Xalrith ship that engaged, a portion of the Joreth fleet was torn apart. It was a clash of titans, a battle of survival where only the strongest would prevail. As the fight raged on, Matthews watched from the command center, her heart pounding. The stakes had never been higher. But for the first time in hours, there was hope. Earth had allies in this fight. And no matter the outcome, humanity was no longer facing the Joreth alone. The battle above Earth had intensified beyond anyone's wildest expectations. The once clear sky was now a swirling vortex of explosions, debris, and beams of energy crisscrossing the heavens. The Leviathan, Earth's shining symbol of military might, continued to tear into the Joreth fleet, its weapons firing with precision and power. But the Joreth were relentless, each ship more heavily armored than the last, their counterattacks savage and unyielding. Dr. Matthews stood at the command center, her eyes fixed on the chaotic display unfolding on the holographic screen before her. The initial hope that Earth's superior technology could hold its own against the invaders was quickly fading. The Joreth had proven to be a formidable enemy, their tactics ruthlessly efficient, and although the Xalrith were holding their own, their ships couldn't match the sheer firepower and brute strength of the Joreth vessels. "We need to pull them back," Matthews shouted over the din of the command center, her voice breaking the tense silence. "If we don't stop them now, we're going to lose the upper hand." General Drake, standing at her side, didn't need any more convincing. He turned to his tactical officer. "Increase firepower to the Leviathan's main cannons. Focus on their lid ships. I want them to feel every shot." The officer nodded, quickly relaying the orders to the crew aboard the warship. Every second counted. On the Leviathan's bridge, Captain Emma Darnell gripped the controls tightly, her knuckles white from the pressure. The ship was taking hits, small but constant, each one rocking them closer to the edge. She could feel the ship's hull groaning under the strain. She had one option left. Activate the quantum pulse. "Now," she ordered. The quantum pulse was the Leviathan's secret weapon, a one-time use device that could disrupt the systems of any ship within a certain radius, rendering them temporarily incapacitated. It was their last chance to gain a tactical advantage in the fight. A heavy thrum ran through the ship as the pulse powered up. With a blinding flash, A massive wave of energy erupted from the Leviathan's core, sweeping outward through the space around them. The Joreth fleet, already reeling from the barrage of human and Saurith fire, found their systems destabilizing. Engines sputtered, weapons malfunctioned, and shields flickered out. For a fleeting moment, the tide of the battle shifted. Yes, Captain Darnell exhaled in relief. We've got them. The Saurith fleet, seeing the sudden vulnerability of the Joreth, took immediate advantage. Their smaller, faster ships darted in and out of the debris field, launching precision strikes on the disoriented Joreth vessels. Explosions erupted from their weakened hulls, and one by one, the Joreth ships began to fall. But even in their disarray, the Joreth were not without their own tricks. A new wave of Joreth reinforcements emerged from hyperspace, dozens of heavily armed dreadnoughts, their weapons more powerful than anything seen so far. As they moved into formation, it was clear they had come prepared to finish the fight once and for all. Their massive weapons charged up, preparing to unleash devastating blows on the now exposed Earth defenses. "Brace for impact," shouted General Drake, his heart sinking as the countdown on the screen in front of him ticked dangerously close to zero. The Leviathan took another hit, and a violent shudder ran through the ship. A part of the hull was damaged, and the engines were faltering. But the Leviathan wasn't out of the fight yet. The massive warship continued to fire, its main cannon blasting through the new Joreth arrivals. But the number of Joreth ships was overwhelming. Then the unexpected happened. A signal crackled through the comms. It was Eldrin's voice. "Dr. Matthews, we are extending our full support." Eldrin's voice echoed in the tense command center. "We will assist in pushing back the Joreth, but we require your cooperation to ensure victory." Matthews blinked in surprise. The Saurith, who had been hesitant and on the brink of turning away, were now offering their full military force to aid humanity in its desperate struggle. "What do you need from us?" Matthews asked quickly, hoping she could find some way to turn the tide in their favor. "We have a weapon," Eldrin continued, "a device capable of disabling their fleet. We can deploy it, but we will need direct access to your ship's communication grid to sync the frequencies. Time is short." Drake turned to Matthews. "If this works, it could give us the edge we need." There was no time for hesitation. Matthews nodded quickly, signaling to the tech team to link their systems with the Saurith. The room fell into a quiet hum of activity as the connection was made. As the Saurith ships began to move into position around the Leviathan, a strange, almost eerie energy began to coalesce. The Saurith's technology, far more advanced than anything Earth had ever seen, hummed with power. Suddenly, beams of intense, focused energy shot out from the Saurith ships, converging in a single devastating pulse that detonated across the Joreth fleet. The blast was immense. Joreth ships began to explode, their systems overloaded and their shields useless against the synchronized attack. The remaining Joreth ships tried to retaliate, but it was too late. Their massive vessels were falling apart at the seams, their power sources flaring out of control as they drifted, vulnerable in space. The battle was won, but the cost was high. The Leviathan's hull was heavily damaged, and Earth's military forces were battered and bruised. The fight had been brutal, and even though they had survived, humanity now had to face the consequences of war. No one could predict what would come next. As the last of the Joreth ships exploded in a brilliant flare of light, Dr. Matthews turned to General Drake and Eldrin. The silence that followed the chaos was deafening. Earth had won, but the price was steep. The Saurith, once seen as potential enemies, were now proven allies. But would they stay allies once the dust settled? Could this fragile bond hold? "Now we must rebuild," Matthews said, her voice solemn. "But we also need to understand why this happened. This war isn't over. The Joreth are gone, but there are others out there, and we must be ready." The battle was over, but the war, it seemed, was just beginning. The aftermath of the battle was almost surreal. The once chaotic sky was now eerily silent, save for the occasional flicker of debris from the destroyed Joreth fleet. The remnants of the battle still hung in space above Earth, a grim reminder of how close humanity had come to its destruction. Yet the worst of the immediate danger had passed, and for the first time in hours, Matthews allowed herself to exhale. The damage to the Leviathan was significant, but not fatal. The massive warship had held together long enough to win the battle, though the repairs would take time. Time that humanity could ill afford. Earth's military forces, though battered, had shown their mettle. The Xalrith fleet, despite their initial coldness and suspicion, had proven invaluable allies in the end. The question now was, what would happen next? Dr. Matthews sat at the center of the command room, staring at the fractured holographic map that displayed the locations of the remaining Joreth ships, none of which were active anymore. The air was heavy with a sense of accomplishment, mixed with the grim reality of the cost. The war was won, but Earth had barely survived. Dr. Matthews, General Drake's voice broke through her thoughts. He was standing near the door, a grim expression on his face. You need to see this. Matthews followed him to a smaller communication station, where a new transmission was coming through. It was from Eldrin. The Xalrith leader's face appeared on the screen, his features stoic and unreadable. Dr. Matthews, he began, his tone measured. I understand the gravity of what has transpired. The Joreth have been neutralized, but our future remains uncertain. We did not enter this battle without cost. We lost ships and crew. And while we fought with you, Earth, I must be clear, this is not an alliance born of friendship. This was necessity. Matthews felt a pang of unease. I understand, she replied, her voice steady. We needed each other to survive. Eldrin nodded slowly. True, but you must realize, Earth, that the Xalrith have never fought for another species before. This was a rare exception, one that has not gone unnoticed within our councils. There are factions within the Xalrith that do not believe in aiding weaker species, especially ones that have only recently reached the stars. You will find that our continued cooperation will require more than just mutual survival. It will require trust. The weight of his words settled heavily on Matthew's shoulders. The battle may have been won, but trust between humans and Xalrith was far from certain. Their alliance was fragile, and the consequences of its unraveling were too dire to contemplate. We will work to earn that trust, Matthews said, her voice firm. But know this, Eldrin, humanity will not turn its back on those who helped us in our darkest hour. If your people are willing to stand by us, we will ensure that the sacrifices made here today are not forgotten. The transmission ended with a simple nod from Eldrin. The screen went dark, leaving a lingering silence in its wake. General Drake turned to Matthews, his expression grim. The Xalrith may be helping now, but this is just the beginning. We've made an enemy of the Joreth, and they're not the only ones out there. There are others watching, waiting. The war might be over for now, but the universe is a dangerous place. Matthews nodded, her mind racing. The victory over the Joreth had been hard-earned, but Earth had learned a valuable lesson. They were not alone in the universe, and their survival depended on forging alliances with those who might not always have their best interests at heart. The Xalrith were proof of that. But even so, Matthews could not shake the feeling that this was just the start of a larger conflict, one that humanity was only beginning to understand. Suddenly, a new alarm blared, breaking her reverie. Matthews spun toward the console, her heart racing. What is it? The technician at the station quickly typed a series of commands, his face pale with shock. Dr. Matthews, we've received an encrypted signal. It's coming from a deep space transmitter beyond the Oort cloud. Who's it from? Matthews asked, her voice steady but filled with urgency. It's not from any known human or alien faction. The technician stammered. The code is, it's not ours. It's... He paused, his hands hovering over the console. It's from the Joreth, he finally said. The room fell silent. The Joreth were gone. Their fleet had been destroyed. But somehow, they were still here, their presence still lingering in the far reaches of space. The encrypted message continued to blink on the screen. The words unreadable, but the implications were clear. The Joreth might be defeated, but they were far from finished. And whatever message they had left behind, Matthews knew it would change everything. She turned to General Drake, her mind racing with possibilities. Prepare for a full decryption. We need to know what they want, and why they're still out there. As the technician worked furiously at the console, Matthews stared out the window, her thoughts once again racing. Humanity had survived, but the war was not over. There were far greater threats looming in the dark corners of the galaxy, and now they would need to prepare not just for defense, but for a future far more complex than they had ever imagined. The fragile peace between Earth and the Xalrith was just the beginning. The next chapter was about to unfold, and Earth's place in the cosmos would never be the same again.